I think it's Ludwig von Mises who said that paper is the only commodity he could think of upon which you could throw a bit of green ink and make it totally worthless. We're talking in that snide comment, we're talking about green rectangles or cash or paper money. And if we are Americans, or if you're American, you know what we're talking about. We're talking about the Federal Reserve note, the dollar bill. Some bills have the number 1 written on the front 4 times and the number 1 written on the back 4 times. And that piece of paper is less powerful somehow than a similar piece of paper than the one to the one I'm holding in my hand here, which is a $100 bill, so-called, the C note, that has the mugshot of a famous American, Ben Franklin, on it. So since I don't understand how it is that this piece of paper is somehow different than the piece of paper with a 1, I've got a question for a monetary guru. The monetary guru is the author of one of my favorite books. It's called All Work and No Pay, which is a great primer on economics, particularly fractional reserve, paper money economics. That is to say, fiat money. Fiat money is money or mediums of exchange or media of exchange, which are created from nothing. They're created by the will of mighty people who have mighty machinery, mighty processes that let them create value from nothing. And so somehow the fact that you change the ink pattern on a piece of paper, in one press, the ink pattern writes a 1, and on another press just nearby with the same, the man who with the ear protection who goes to check one press goes over to check the other press, Paul Hein, and on that press, there are roaring off large sheets of paper with the 100s written on them. So what is the difference, Dr. Hein, Paul Hein, editor, well, former editor of Monetary Realist and writer of All Work and No Pay? What's the difference between a $100 bill and a $1 bill?
2 zeros, meaning nothing twice. The difference is that you have confidence in that $100 bill, Mr. Toole. Is 100 times as much confidence as you have in the 1, because there's nothing else behind it.
Are you saying that the zeros are, they don't represent a real difference in what that paper speaks about or refers to, Dr. Hein?
Well, the paper has also the word note on it, which makes you think that it's some sort of IOU, and that the $100 bill will give you 100 times as much as the $1 bill of whatever it is that's being promised by that note. But nothing's being promised. The whole thing is a colossal farce, which has been around for so long, I guess, that people don't realize how fantastic it is.
Well, all right. So, but used to be that the dollar bill would mean something, right? Was there not language on the bill at some point far back where the words being different made that piece of paper somehow distinct? You say that the zeros don't add anything. Was there ever a time when the zeros on a piece of paper really gave you a claim to something more than if you had just a 1 on the bill?
Sure. There was a time when there was language on the bill that said payable in demand in silver, or in some cases gold, at the Federal Reserve Bank. I think that happened last in June of 1968, when you could take your so-called silver certificate, which looked just like our modern greenbacks, to the mint and get $1 of silver. Today, if you tried that, they'd laugh at you.
Why would they laugh at you?
Because they're not going to give you anything. You may even have a silver certificate. As a matter of fact, I have one that promises to pay the bearer in demand $1 in silver. But there's no sense going to the bank and saying, I want my silver, because, as they say, they're not going to take that seriously.
Well, maybe you need to go back to the issuer of that note, Dr. Hein, that says promise to pay, and say, well, I have a legal claim upon you. Please give me $1 coin. Can't you do that?
Yes, you can do it. But, to rely upon the law, Mr. Toulis, I think is probably a grave mistake. I don't think the law means anything. The people who write the laws will interpret them as they please and ignore them as they please. So you can take it there and say, yes, this is a lawful note that promises to pay $1 to the bearer on demand. You can take it to the United States Treasury. You can take it to the Federal Reserve Bank. But rest assured, they won't give you anything for it.
The best they can do is say, well, we can change that $1 bill for some clad coins, maybe. or if you have $100 bill that you're offering as a demonstration of your point, they can say, well, we could perhaps break that up into two bills like it that have 50 written on them.
Yeah, or 10/10s, right. Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the problem? Why should my listener care about this conundrum? This is really kind of confusing, Dr. What's the main problem for my listener? How is he affected by the fact that we have these bills that circulate, and then we have digital versions of them that don't really give him a claim? Bills that have legal writing on them that you're saying don't have any legal power. They have no legal import, Dr. Hine.
That's right. Well, I'm not sure your listeners are concerned about it. The system's been around so long and it functions apparently so smoothly that when I've talked to people about it, even years ago, they didn't understand why I was concerned about it. But my concern is that in order to get those pieces of paper, say the one with 100 on it or so, you have to work. You have to give something, namely a certain number of hours of your life, to get that piece of paper. Whereas the people who issued the paper that you worked so hard to get did nothing to earn it. They just created it out of thin air. So there is a basic injustice there, plus the fact that there's only one source of these numbers, whether they're digital or written on paper or just on account in a bank. You had to work to get them, but they don't stand for anything. They don't obligate the issuer of any property whatsoever. So there's a fundamental injustice there.
And tell my listener why it's unjust. Maybe he doesn't quite get it. I'm not sure I quite understand how it's unjust. I mean, I'm so used to what we have, Dr. Hine, that I'm not sure I really understand why it's unjust that they can make these dollars and I have to work for mine. What's wrong with that? I mean, I'm a working stiff after all, family man. I go about in a car. I run a business. I accept payments in dollars, right? Green rectangles. I go to the credit union with green rectangles sometimes to deposit from an advertiser. What's the big deal? How is there any unjustness in the system? Explain that, please.
Well, that's why my book is called All Work and No Pay. You work to get those pieces of rectangle, which are called notes, which leads you to think, if you think about it at all, that you're entitled to get something for the note. I mean, a note is an IOU after all. If you were with a friend and they wanted to borrow some money and they borrowed $100, so-called, from you and gave you a note saying that they would pay $100, and then you went to redeem the note and they said, oh, I don't have to redeem it, you'd obviously feel that you were cheated. However, when the government does it with the Federal Reserve financing the whole business by issuing these things, you don't feel cheated because they have said that it's legal for you to take these notes and pass them on to somebody else. And this makes the whole system possible. Not necessarily just or proper, but profitable.
So explain what you mean by passing the note on to somebody else. Is my listener doing this? Is he involved in this process, Dr. Hine?
Yes, we're all cheating each other. If I gave you a note for $100 and you came and said, okay, Hine, I want you to redeem your note for $100. And I said, I'm not going to give you anything for it. You try and passing it off to somebody else. So you went to the filling station and filled up your tank and you gave the fellow this note that I have this IOU from Dr. Hine. I'm sure he's going to pay for it. So why don't you take that? And he'll say, okay, and he would take it. So you've gotten the gasoline for the note, which didn't cost me anything to issue. And when the fellow with the gasoline station went to buy some supplies, he would use that note. In other words, it keeps passing from hand to hand to hand, and nobody ever realizes that they're not ever going to get anything for it.
Yeah, if they traced it all back to Dr. Hine, who wrote the piece of paper in the first place, they would find that there you are, the retired ophthalmologist in the St. Louis area, sitting behind your manual typewriter, Dr. Hine, as you are on the back of your cover of your book, published here in Tennessee, and they would say, well, boy, you're the man who issued it, and you look at them blankly and say, well, I didn't intend ever to pay that. And so that note has gone through the economy, and we'll explain again why people accepted it. Why would anybody have accepted the Dr. Hine note for $100 for all these different services, from hand to bank to check register to cash register to pocket of citizen to purse of citizen to store? Everybody's passing on this note. Why? How did that happen that the Hine note made it that far?
Because nobody presented it to me and asked for payment. And when they did, I said, well, I have a nice relationship with the government of this state and of the United States, and they say that my notes are legal to offer. Most fraudulent notes, that is, notes which are not really redeemable, it's a crime to pass them or to try and buy something with them. But my notes, that's not true, because my notes have been declared legal to offer, or a legal tender. And so I don't have to redeem my note, and you don't need to worry about it. Just go out and buy something with it.
Okay, so what you would say to rebuff that querulous, troublesome customer, 50 people downstream from your issuing hand, who comes to you and says, I want redemption, you would simply say, well, look, I don't know what you're talking about. You can use that in the economy. There are people who would recognize the Hine $100 note. It's been given approval by good people in Washington. Just get about your business and hope for the best. That's kind of what would happen. And so the listener, let's assume that that's my listener, he turns around and says, okay, Dr. Hine, I guess I'll do my best. And then he goes to Olive Branch Mediterranean Restaurant, a great restaurant here in East Ridge, and offers that note. And so that restaurant, which prefers cash over credit, will take the note and pass it on itself, right, to suppliers of chicken and vegetables.
Sure. Mm-hmm. It's a big con game that we're all passing these things around among ourselves.
Well, is there a moral argument to this? Is there some way that my listener, Dr. Hine, can be right and true in dealing with this economy? Is there anything he can do to remedy it? Is there anything he can do? That's one question, I guess. And the second one would be, is there anything he can do to avoid the damage that might come to him personally because he's involving himself in something that is inherently dishonest? How do we escape culpability or guilt, Dr. Hine?
Oh, well, I'm not sure you can. I mean, the system is designed so that you're suckered into it, and to try and get out of it is very, very difficult. But if you owed, say, $20 to somebody and said, look, I'm not going to give you one of these pieces of paper with 20 on it. I'm going to give you a silver coin, which is 90% silver and weighs 412.5 grains and has the word $1 stamped on it. I'll give you that instead of a $20 bill. And if everybody did that, of course, there'd be no point in counterfeiting these pieces of paper if nobody would accept them. But that's not going to happen, I'm afraid.
Well, we have no honest money circulating in the economy, Dr. Hine, because bad money has chased out good. No one wants to deal in lawful coin and currency, which is buried in private vaults and in attics and in basements around the country. Billions of dollars worth of it, I'm willing to guess that much of it, of course, has been melted down again. But no one will use real constitutional honoring coins of silver or gold when there's bad money that will be readily accepted. Is it possible that good money at some point can drive out bad, that people will start demanding gold and silver in payment? Is there a scenario in which that might happen, Dr. Hine?
I think, the reverse of the statement, bad money drives out good, is, as you mentioned, very true. Good money would drive out bad, but only if sufficient number of people are using it. I mean, the counterfeiter is not going to keep counterfeiting his notes if nobody's going to take them. If large numbers of people would say, I don't want that stuff, you've got to pay me in silver and gold, then, of course, there would be a crisis in the economy. But as I say, that's really not likely to happen. I've talked to people before about this, and they always say, what difference does it make? I'll just use this stuff. It works all right, and I can redeem it. One old fellow told me that when I gave him a talk about money, and I said, how can you redeem this paper note? And he said, well, I redeem it at the gas station. I redeem it at the grocery. I said, you don't redeem the bank's note. The bank is the only person that can redeem the note. But he laughed at that idea and said he was happy with the bank's notes, and he felt that he was redeeming them when he bought things with them. So it's pretty hard to overcome that point of view.
And you are a monetary realist, Dr. Hine. You're the author of one of my favorite books. It's called All Work and No Pay, and you can find copies on Amazon. Of course, they're used. The book was published in the early 1980s by Spencer Judd here in Southeast Tennessee, up in Monteagle. And redemption, I think, is an important point. Of course, Christianity, Dr. Hine, is all about redemption. And in the idea of redemption, I think, is there to look sternly upon and judge and maybe even condemn our American monetary system, which is this fiat paper money, which in the end hurts the poor more than the rich, right? The rich lose a lot in inflation, and they're vulnerable as well to financial catastrophe. But paper money hurts the poor people every day. Is that? I'm making a statement about that. Do you think that's true? That poor people are hurt more by lawless paper issue than the rich?
Probably, because since the counterfeiter aka the Federal Reserve, can keep printing these notes ad infinitum, they can do so, and they are doing so, so that the number of so-called dollars is increasing all the time, whereas the production of goods and services can't keep up with it. In other words, prices are going to continually edge upward because there are more money, more dollars chasing fewer goods, let's say. So that hurts the poor people more than the rich, because the rich are always better off than the poor. So yes, it hurts everyone, but especially the poor, who are living on, say, a modest wage, and they can't do much to improve that, whereas the prices of the things they buy are steadily creeping upward. So yes, it's a nasty, unjust, and immoral system, especially where the poor are concerned.
David Stockman guesses, Dr. Hine, that there's a $67 trillion public and private debt load I think, in our part of the world. He says that there's a 58% gain in stock prices, an 8% gain in real earnings, and a 2% gain in real production. And it couldn't happen, he says, without an honest, free market. So we really don't, we live in a free country, we think, but the money system, our dollar bills are part of effectively of an enslavement by the rich of everybody else, by the people at the very top, the ones closest to the spigot, the fountain, if you will, of this new money created in the banking sector.
Yes. Yeah, if you're the first ones to get hold of it, you're in good shape because it hasn't lost much of its buying power. But for instance, say you are concerned about your child's college education, if you really think that going to college is a good idea, and you set aside money for that purpose, by the time the kid's old enough to go to college, that money's buying power is shriveled enormously, and you're not going to be able to buy the things you thought you were going to buy with it. So, yeah, it's a bad system. It hurts everybody, and as long as there is such a thing as fractional reserve banking, where the bank can create an enormous amount of money with nothing whatsoever to bank it, or back it, I should say, then the system is eventually going to fail, which I think is, coming up in the maybe not too distant future.
Right. Well, people like you have been talking about the prospect, the theoretical prospect, which I think we would say is it's a necessity, given human history of such schemes. It of necessity has to collapse on its own weight. Is somewhere in the near future, and there are writers such as Charles Hugh Smith, Dr. Hine, who writes of TwoMinds.com, and also Franklin Sanders is telling me that there's not a lot of wiggle room left for the system, which is continually making new dollars, and every new dollar created in that lending system has less effect. So in other words, the drinking, the drunken party has less. You get less of a high with each sip of the cocktail.
Yes, and because the new money always comes into existence as a debt, and there is only one source of money, and that source only provides it as a debt. It's not like gold that you can mine and you say, this is mine, free and clear. If you go to the bank to get new money, which means you're getting a loan, which they create out of thin air, that is the debt. And every time money is created as a debt, more has to be repaid than was borrowed. And that's obviously impossible. So there is no solution except to keep creating more money and more money and more money until the debt is so enormous that the system collapses, which is the collapse that we're talking about.
That you have gridlock at the top. So it's Cash Friday, my listener here on the David Tullis Show, and we're talking with Paul Hine. He's the author of one of my favorite books of all time. It's called All Work and No Pay. It's a great read for your high school student, maybe your junior high school student as well. And he's in the St. Louis area, retired ophthalmologist. He has a very clear optic on this problem of non-referential coin currency. So the problem, Dr. Hine, if I can get this straight now, is that we have bills that look like they're illegal, they look like they're official, but they don't refer to anything outside themselves. They're internally referring. They don't give the holder of the note a real claim upon a real asset, such as a dollar. This bill says $100, and that's just a joke because the piece of paper doesn't give me a claim to title to possession. I can't redeem this paper for the real dollar. Is that what you're saying? I cannot redeem this paper for a real dollar.
No, provided you realize what a real dollar is. If you ask the banker who provided you with that $100 note to define dollar, I'm willing to bet you he won't be able to do so, because I've done that, and the banker said he didn't really know. So he can't define dollar. He can't define money. I mean, what is money? these are such fundamental things that if you start to think about them, you could, well, as happened to many of us, we became monetary realists when we just started asking simple questions.
Well, this is David Toulis and monetary realist Dr. Paul Hein from St. Louis. Thanks so much for joining us here on the David Toulis Show. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Dr. Hein is the author of All Work and No Pay, one of my favorite books, and you can find it at Amazon. It's not in print, but there are I'm sure there are used, happily marked used copies out there. And your teenage son or daughter should read that book as a primer on the real economy, and I would say even the real local economy that I described here. David Toulis, Nooga Radio. Next is Sean Hannity. Sean is next. Stay tuned.
3, 2, 1.
Chatter, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.